Hey everybody, welcome back to Mac and Mike. You're seeing me now. In a moment, you'll see Mac. We're going to have a twofold discussion, I guess, at least this week. The first is the the lawsuits in Seattle that got $30 million to the people that got injured, and that may have implications for Minnesota. And the other big subject today, of course, is tariffs. And just a moment ago, Mac was really spouting some really good facts on the tariffs, at least opinions, and a lot of this is opinion. But I said, hey, let's stop and let's get this on recording. So, Matt, I don't know if you want to start with the lawsuits in Seattle, I guess it was. And was that Seattle or?
Yes.
Seattle.
Yes, it was.
Hey,
let's talk about that. Right? There's not a lot of information to be, but I think there is a caution to be held by various Democratic-run cities in various locations when they say, we are not going to enforce the law. Because what happened in Seattle during the Summer of Love, you might recall, when we had all those riots, and independent individuals set up blockades and barriers or refused to let police and EMS get into certain. There was like a 3-square block area that they called the Chaz, or the chop zone, right? And basically what it was an area where individuals with no elected authority and no police authority and no authority from the residents simply took over and enforced their version of the law. And a couple of people died, and many other people were injured. And there's been a lawsuit that's been working its way through the courts for some time now. And specifically, there was a $30 million lawsuit, or there was a lawsuit brought against the city of Seattle for one person whose life was lost. It was a young man. And the claim was that the city had enforced their laws and not let nefarious individuals take over this chop zone or Chaz zone, that the life of this young man would not have ended. And a jury sat and listened to the arguments and said, yes, you're right. The city, once they're, the city's incorporated, the city has the authority, the city has the elected officials and the police department. They can't pick and choose where they enforce the law. If somebody tries to take over and do their own law, the city has a requirement, has an obligation, has a moral responsibility along with the authority to enforce the laws that were enacted in that location. So the city is going to pay, or at least unless it goes to appeal or unless they negotiate something, the city's going to pay a $30 million penalty to this family that lost their loved one due to this insurrection type activity that was going on in Seattle. And very honestly, while I don't want to see the taxpayers pay the $30 million, I think that's right. I don't think any mayor can simply decide, I'm not going to enforce these laws. Or worse, I'm not going to enforce the law in this part, this geographic part of our community. Because not only does it have ramifications, in my opinion, for what's going on in Minneapolis right now with ICE, Mike, but what about the city of Chicago? The south side of Chicago, where every weekend there's 30 or 40 or 50 shootings and 20 deaths due to gunfire. Does the city bear some responsibility for those deaths? And one could argue that if it happens continuously, weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend, and the people with the badges and the guns don't do anything to stop it, it sounds to me like they're shirking their duties and responsibilities. And those deaths in Chicago, much like the death of this young man in Seattle, somebody might be financially responsible for it. I'm not a lawyer. I just look at it from a common sense perspective. Do you disagree, Mike?
No, I agree 100%. And I think it's going to be, there's a direct parallel to Minneapolis with Good and Freddie, because law enforcement was not there to contain those people. and the mayor was behind that, and the governor. Now, you bring up a very interesting point when it comes to Chicago, because I did not think of that. And it could actually be applied to any city, South Bronx,
Yes.
parts of LA that are not properly policed. And I think if more people would find attorneys who are always hungry, they'll take cases pro bono like this to start suing city officials. And what I just, as you were saying that, it just dawned on me, as taxpayers, the citizens that vote and pay taxes will soon find that their vote for the officials has a direct correlation to the amount of taxes they will have to pay for the liberal policies that fail the people in the inner cities.
Yep.
And that would just be genius.
Now, there are laws on the books that, I don't know if you know this, Mike, but if a police officer in the performance of their duty shoots someone and they die, that police officer cannot, or the municipality or organization, the government entity that has that police officer, they can't be sued unless you can prove that they did something wrong. Okay? For example, the individual wasn't doing anything wrong, and the police shot them, without any reason to do so. They can't do that. But in the performance of their duties, if there's a death, there's a wrongful death, they can't be sued for that. And that's to protect the many people who risk their lives to protect us. That thin blue line that we talk about oftentimes, that is the difference between chaos and civilization. But this is slightly different and it's nuanced. If they don't do what they're supposed to do and people die, do they have responsibility for that? And I would argue they do. And again, if there's one weekend where a bunch of people get shot and the police weren't prepared for it, you can't hold, no one's perfect, right? The only perfect man ever to walk on the face of the earth, they hung on a tree 2,000 years ago. But no one is perfect. But if it happens every single weekend, as it does in Chicago, can't you just say, based on the reoccurrence of this problem every weekend, there has to be some sort of action taken to stop it? And if you don't take action to stop it, don't the citizens have a right to retribution? I think they do.
Yeah, it's a difference between the sins of omission and commission.
Yes.
And a lot of our law is based on some of these biblical positions. So, as you pointed out, if someone's killed and it's not because the police were not policing, it's one thing. If it's because they were there and it happened, it's different. So, like, I remember Joe, our friend Joe, he invited me out to Chicago when he lived there. We went downtown to the Bean and everything. It was very beautiful. And he said, "You just don't want to walk 6 blocks that way, Mike. You can walk all around the river." Like, where was the governor of Illinois walking around the river walk saying, "Everything's fine." Well, it's always fine. The police are always on that walk. Walk 6 blocks down to where my friend Joe was pointing, you'll see a completely different story.
Yep.
But yeah, I hope this catches on fire and incentivizes people to start at least pursuing it, because understand that cities have to tie up their lawyers. So even if they don't win the cases, there'll be expenditures for going through the legal process, which is a form of leverage to get things done the right way.
I saw a news blurb. It's one of these afternoon news programs, slow news, and President Trump was speaking, and I'm not entirely certain about the whole, but he was talking about the crime reduction in Washington D.C. And this African American woman whose grandson was shot and murdered on the streets of D.C. was on there, and she was praising Donald Trump like some sort of savior. And she said, You know, she's a Democrat. She's always voted Democrats. And she said, but until Donald Trump came, no one was taking care of the problems that were the problems that ended up with my 16-year-old grandson being killed, being shot to death by a gun. He said, you can not like Donald Trump, but I don't know how you can not like what he's done to make the streets safer, to make it safer for people like my grandson, who was murdered through no fault of his own. He's completely innocent. And I thought to myself, what a unique juxtaposition of this African American Democrat voter whose only concern was the life of her grandson, and praising Donald Trump, who she probably never would have thought of supporting in any way, shape, or form, simply because he took care of the problem that took her grandson's life. And I think that is the message that needs to be driven home in these places like Seattle and Minneapolis and LA and Chicago and New York City and all these places where they're having these kinds of problems. You can say you don't like the way ICE behaves. And I'm not going to protect or defend every ICE agent who's ever rounded up any illegals. What I am saying, though, all of us need to stand for the rule of law, even when it's inconvenient or it sounds a little bit like something that we don't want to do. Without law, there is no civilization. And that thin blue line, the police officers of their various types, I don't care whether you're talking about the local police, whether you're talking about state police, whether you're talking about immigration and customs enforcement, the ICE officers, the marshals and the FBI, and all these people, they all have one goal: to enforce the law to keep us safe. And all of this nation, including the ones that are out there protesting ICE, they need to take a quick evaluation of what this young lady, young grandmother in D.C. said, and this lawsuit that happened in Seattle because a young man was killed because the police were not doing their duty, and that was by the mayor's orders, by the way.
Yes.
Remember, the mayor of Seattle was the one who coined the summer of love.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, that goes to two things that I brought up in the past that I think are worth remembering. My one friend, who is also a Democrat, reminded me of the phrase, nothing matters till it becomes personal. So you can have these feelings about ICE and law enforcement, and until things affect you in a negative way, it doesn't matter. When this grandmother, of course, lost her grandson, it hit her. Now, the thing is, my father had the other saying, which I'm going way back, and I'm sure the saying goes back very far. And remember, I am from New York City. He was born and raised in New York City. And the saying was, uh, the conservative in New York City is the Democrat who was mugged on the subway yesterday. Now, of course, that's a good saying to remember. But the thing that struck me when you were talking is how far back does that go? I mean, New York City's been a liberal city for most of its existence.
Sure. Yep.
So this has been a consistent problem for many, many decades. This is not something new. We're talking about it in the present tense with current news. But this should say to the person, if anyone is listening that's an independent that leans left or a left person, that the consequences of the liberal mindset have been negative for a very long time, and that should tell you something.
Yes.
You need to change the way you think, vote, and talk to other people.
Here's a question we should probably investigate sometime, Mike. I'm sure you're aware that in New York City, they let anyone vote in the municipal elections. In other words, if you got off the airplane yesterday from Somalia and you're in New York City, you can show up and vote for the mayor of New York. one of the reasons I think Dami was elected is because they don't do citizen verification of people before they vote in municipal or local elections. Here's a question I have for you. The SAVE Act, right? I'm not sure if it has passed, but I think it will pass if it hasn't already. The SAVE Act requires that people provide a photo ID, proof of citizenship, in order to vote in federal elections. Well, if you have to have an ID to vote in a federal election, but you can be anybody who lives in the city and vote in the local elections. How are they going to separate those two voting pools? Are there going to be some sort of rules where you can't vote in a federal election? Are there going to be separate ballots for federal elections and local elections? I don't know the answer to that. And it's a problem that's ahead of us, not a problem that exists right now because the SAVE Act hasn't been implemented even if it has passed the Congress. So it'll be interesting to me to see what happens in that arena because, I firmly believe if only citizens were allowed to vote in the New York City election, I'm not real sure that Mamdani would have been elected.
Well, yes, I think the non-citizen vote affects local elections more. And there are various rules and laws by cities and states in our liberal precincts. However, I have to say, I've done some deep dive investigations into the voting thing, and it does not appear that illegals vote in any significant numbers, at least that we've been able to uncover. I forget which, the Rand Institute or somebody did the studies, and then there was a conservative group that backed it up that said no, that in the past 40 years or so, they can only come up with a couple hundred instances where they found non-citizen voting. So on a federal level, it's not going to have a big impact. Now, on a local level, it can be a couple dozen votes. But I do listen to the other side, and I know that most of the time they're just a bunch of whiny babies trying to make excuses. However, you have to, facts are facts, and I don't want to say that they're wrong about this because even the right leaning researchers have come to the same conclusion. But here's the thing, even if it is not a true and significant problem, there is the perception in this country that it is a problem. And would it not be better to alleviate people's minds by mandating proof of at least being a registered Republican or Democrat and being able to vote, than to let it go and let people always wonder? You and I had spoken at length about the 2020 COVID election. And
Yes.
people are still arguing about this. Now, that was, a one off. COVID caused a lot of different things to happen, and people become very suspicious. So it really would not matter what the facts are, it's the perception of the people. And the people have to feel, this is one place I don't like feelings, but the people have to feel like their elections are secure,
Yes.
or you will have terrible problems. Now, on the other side, maybe you do have to listen a little bit to the left when they argue about citizenship verification. For example, you and I, we can go to our poll and they won't ask us for anything more than our photo ID. We've been voting there for decades.
Right.
If you move to another location, they may require that you go out and get your birth certificate and other material, or what they call real ID, if you don't have it yet, to prove that you're an American citizen. That could be a problem. Maybe they need to tweak this a little bit because really the numbers are not high and significant. But anyway, it's sort of a nuance that I thought I'd throw in because I was kind of shocked myself when I found out what the real numbers were. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure how many people are voting who shouldn't be. I do believe there are ways that people can inject fraudulent votes into the totals. And this is not new, Mike. Famously, John Kennedy was elected by the Electoral College votes in the state of Illinois when, Cook County obviously later admittedly cooked the voting totals. So I think people want to know for certain that the election was legal and honest, even if their guy loses, even if their candidate loses. What's that your mentor, Bob Morey, said to you about elections and about the attitudes of people?
He said many things, and I can't remember right now.
The one thing you told me before is the one thing that people are willing to fight for is that they think that their elections are not righteous.
Oh, well, that's what I just said. Yes, it was tied to that very premise that regardless of the facts, the people need to feel, again, I'm not a big feeling guy, but they need to believe at least that their elections are secure.
Yep. So I think we beat that up enough, and I think we kind of strayed from the whole $30 million award for not doing their job. What do you think about the Supreme Court striking down the tariffs under that special clause of the emergency law that was passed? And now Democrats are gleefully running around saying, the king is dead, the king is dead, long live the king, Good, Trump can't do any more tariffs.
Well, we know that they'll find another way. But what I found very interesting is yesterday, the local NBC affiliate, they pop up on my Facebook newsfeed. They said the Supreme Court has ruled that Trump's tariffs were illegal, that he was illegally doing this. Now, okay, you want to talk about psychological operations and how we frame things. Number one, the Supreme Court did not say it was illegal. And I want people should pay attention to language. The Supreme Court rarely has a unanimous decision in the first place, and this was a 6-3 split.
Yeah.
So if you're going to use the word illegal, which the Supreme Court never uses, they may say unauthorized, not in line with the Constitution. It is still a verdict that is rendered by opinion. Now, if you say that it is illegal, what you're telling me is there are 3 top Supreme Court justices that would have been in favor of illegal action. See, that's why we don't use the word illegal.
Right.
Things were untested, and most Supreme Court rulings are because they have never truly been fully tested. Things don't just willy-nilly make their way up to the Supreme Court. So when they said President Trump's tariffs, or President Trump himself, was found to be committing illegal tariffs, that is not an accurate statement. It's a charge statement, and it gets people upset. And I just think people are being duped. But on the tariffs,
it used to be news was simply the delivery of facts, and now what we do is news programs are slanted based on the bias of the people who run that particular news department. And it's unfortunate. What they should have said was more accurately was there was one law that allowed the president on an emergency basis to use tariffs as a direct part of this emergency process. And they said, we can find nothing in this emergency process that allows you to do this. So if you listen to Secretary Bassett, and he's got much more knowledge on this than I think you and I do, he basically said, okay, well, sure, the law that we quoted when we put the tariffs in place allows us to move more quickly. But we have other laws. And he mentioned Section 301 and Section 2, whatever. He mentioned specific sections of law that allow us to do it. So we're just going to do it using another law that has previously been tested and gone to court and tested in courtrooms thousands of times. So I wish people would just be, rather than being sloppy and inaccurate, I wish people would be truthful and specific. Facts are hard and stubborn things, as they say, right? And if people take what your local NBC television network said, they're going to be upset when the tariffs don't go away. And here's what you have to understand: I don't understand people who take pleasure in something that hurts them. I guess there are people, we've heard about those kind of people. They want to be hurt. That's where they get their enjoyment, and we won't get into some of the
Masochism.
surlier kinds of references to that. But here's the thing: what Donald Trump is doing is he's using tariffs strategically to help the American economy by creating more jobs. Now, you may not know this, you may not like it, but countries like China, and there are many others, they have to keep their people employed to avoid any kind of disagreement and insurgency against the government. The thing that keeps people not overthrowing the government is if they have good jobs, they have enough money, and they can live a good life, and there's no reason to upset the apple cart if everything's good at home, right? So when a country like China sends goods to the United States and they literally sell them below the cost to make them, which happens frequently, much more frequently than people understand, because the government of China subsidizes those industries to keep those jobs going. Okay, our form of government doesn't allow that. We don't have a government that can go to a steel manufacturing forging plant and say, look, if you sell your steel for 30 cents or $30 less than what you're charging now, we'll give you that money back through tax revenues and other ways. There are governments in this world that do that. So what you're doing is that while China is protecting jobs in China, and one could argue, listen, if you put tariffs on, that raises prices on the goods that I'm buying. So I'm being hurt. I'm paying more at the grocery store, at the mall, or online, wherever I'm buying my stuff, I'm paying higher prices because these tariffs are in place. And the companies don't just eat the tariffs, they pass it along to the consumer. And all that's true. However, you can look at it in the short term or you can look at it in the long term. And I mentioned China, and I will tell you this: the Chinese don't look at things in a 5-year or 10-year plan. They look in terms of 100 years. Okay. So while the United States of America looks at things in short term fashion, many other governments that have our capitalist economy look at things that are relatively, some long term, but many short term. They're not able to subsidize their products to sell them at below cost. So what China does is, and this is where we get hurt, instead of buying the cheap goods today, if we have to pay more money for that product from China or Indonesia or fill in the blank of those countries that are allowed to do that, we have a short-term benefit, but we're not building jobs, good-paying, family-sustaining jobs in America. All those companies, all those big organizations like Apple and the Taiwan chip company and all these companies that are in the automobile companies, they're investing literally billions of dollars in building new plants in the United States of America. They're building those plants here to avoid the tariffs. And by building plants here, guess what they're doing? They're creating good manufacturing jobs that not only support the manufacturer, because the reason why a manufacturing job is so much better than a service-oriented job is this: a manufacturer takes labor and raw materials and puts them together and creates a product or a service that's exponentially more valuable than the cost of the raw material and labor. So those jobs, those manufacturing jobs in a certain geographic area, they are self-sustaining. What they make pays for the job and the building and everything else. If you're a copier repairman or you're the local dry cleaner, no disrespect to those people. What I'm saying though is that the manufacturing job, that person who works for the manufacturer, they're going to need to use the dry cleaning services. They're going to need to buy the copier or the computer or whatever. So a manufacturing job not only sustains its own job, but it supports other jobs in the service industry around that geographic area. So it has multiple benefits to the economy and to the community. And what Donald Trump's tariffs are doing is rebuilding the manufacturing job base in America. You know how they talk about all those years offshoring jobs? We're sending jobs offshore. And we did that because the labor over there was so significantly less expensive. Well, now with tariffs, we're making the playing field level. And once again, we're having manufacturing jobs in the United States. So people who are out in the streets today yelling, Donald Trump got slammed, he got slapped, he's not allowed to use tariffs that way. Those people are short-sighted and they don't understand the economic realities of what's going on.
Well, you're right. Number one, my argument has always been from the beginning that the main reason we need to reevaluate the tariff system is so that we can reshore manufacturing so that we are not caught up in the same supply chain issues we saw during COVID. COVID it explained to the American people that all of this outsourcing is not good. And it just so happened that the people that brought us COVID are the same people making our medicines.
Yes.
This is not smart. Now, I do have a veteran friend. I won't say his name. He's always afraid I'm going to out him, but I'm going to send this portion to him. I do believe, and it's hard I've always wanted him to come on with us.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I try and represent his position, it may end up being a straw man position, which I don't want to do. And if you don't know what a straw man is out there, it's when you misrepresent somebody else's opinion so that you can knock it down like a straw man. Now, his main problem, I believe, with Donald Trump's tariffs is that he said he applies them willy-nilly, and he thought this negatively affected the market. Well, maybe there is some truth to that early on. Plus, he said, like you, that others argue this raises the prices for everyone. Now, I did a little deep dive into that, and I'll put this maybe in the text because I don't remember the exact numbers, but something that I think Bessett pointed out, and I did verify this once, that the tariffs only created a 0.5% increase. And guess what? That's a one-time thing. Inflation goes on and increases every year. The tariffs were a 0.5 one-time increase, at least at the time that I did the research. Now, that may have changed, so I'll reevaluate and look at it. So, looking at this factually, the arguments against tariffs, destroying the economy, messing with the market, I do not believe are as legitimate as folks would like to believe. Now, also, our senator here in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, was recently asked about this again. And he's been one of those guys that doesn't go against Trump all the time. His big bugaboo was that people are okay with tariffs if it's against China, but he doesn't understand going after our friends like the Canadians and the Europeans. Now, I'd love to sit down and talk to John. I really would. I think he's the kind of guy that would listen. I think he's the kind of guy you could talk to. And what Donald Trump has pointed out, and others, he's not alone, Besson has said the same. And Besson is, I think, more reasonable and respected because this is his field of expertise. That ever since the Second World War, and I noticed this traveling to Europe and China and Japan, they run on 220 line over there, right? I asked when I first got there, why is there a difference in electricity? I didn't know. I was a young man. And they said, well, that's because we rebuilt their infrastructure after the Second World War. And I said, so we rebuilt their stuff better than our own.
Yes.
Did they ever pay us back for that? No. As a matter of fact, excuse my French for a moment, they shit on us. They just took advantage of Uncle Sam's benevolence. And they kept this mentality where we owed them somehow. Well, Donald Trump comes along and says, well, doing this for 60 years plus. We need to re-level this playing field a little bit.
Right.
Why should we keep supplementing these other countries? So I'm done with my rant.
No, you're absolutely right, Mike. And here's, it's the same thing with NATO, right? NATO is supposed to be paying 2% of GDP towards the shared cost of NATO. And the European countries weren't doing that. And we were paying much more than our 2%. And so, first Trump scolded them into doing 2%, then they raised it to 5%. The chief of NATO thinks Donald Trump is the greatest thing that ever walked on the face of the earth because finally NATO is being funded at a level that makes us able to be a resistance force against the threat that they have, specifically in Europe. Russia's not going to attack the United States of America. They attacked Ukraine, didn't they? So the next country after that is Poland and Germany and so on and so on, just like what happened in World War II. But you know what, Mike, you're right. And I think that we have a short-term view of the world. And I understand that. We've been in a recession or an inflation state for a number of years. But you mentioned about the medicines. 90% of our antibiotics are made by people who don't really like us. China and India. India kind of better than China. So what would happen if there was a shortage of antibiotics? What would we do? Because I'm certain we wouldn't get it. So in that case, it's not a matter of how much the medicine costs. It's a matter of whether or not we can get it or not. And that's why, for security's sake, defense sake, it's incredibly important that we have those kind of manufacturing plants here in the United States. And Donald Trump is doing that. And what frosts me is that we've become so polarized in our politics. If Donald Trump says the sun is shining, somebody has to say the clouds are hiding the sun. It's a gloomy day. They can never allow him to say anything positive and agree with it. Now, a friend of mine just called me on a carpet the other day. He said, Alan, have you ever said anything detrimental towards Trump? And I said to him, yeah, Fred, I've said a lot of things detrimental to Trump. There's a lot of things I don't like about Donald Trump. But I'm evaluating the benefit to the nation versus what I don't like about Donald Trump individually and personally. He's from New York City. He's very brusque, talks about himself in third person. Oftentimes he uses hyperbole. This is the greatest economy ever in the history of the world. No, it's not, Donald Trump. It really isn't. But I understand you've made significant improvements, and maybe what you've just told the truth rather than the hyperbole, it would be better off for all of us. But despite all that, you tell me what policy Donald Trump has implemented that has been a negative to the United States of America. And even these tariffs we're talking about now, there may be a short-term negative, but it's a long-term exceedingly positive.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. And this is the kind of discussion I get into with my friend that I mentioned to you that says he's kind of homeless. He's not a Democrat or a Republican. But the point is, it does boil down to personal and personality. The one area that it really bleeds over into policy is the area of trust. Because of his hyperbole, you never know if the numbers he's presenting or the White House now is presenting are accurate. When I hear them, I always go, okay, I have to look them up. And I go to 2 or 3 different artificial intelligence sources rather than just relying on one website in a Google search. And oftentimes it's a mixed bag of, yeah, these numbers are accurate. And sometimes, no, these numbers are way off, or this is a nuanced position. You need to look at these things, and it gives you balance. So see me, Matt, my friend doesn't understand. My other friend doesn't understand, but you do. I am really personally invested in my own credibility. I cannot live with myself when I say something wrong. And I'm always correcting people on my side, the Republican side of the fence, when they are exaggerating and lying. So to me, integrity is just important. And I don't care. It's not really about me. I wish the whole world would just have a little bit more integrity with their words.
Yeah.
Don't just fire, you've said I'm a granular person. And, we fire from the hips and we repeat things that just aren't true.
I've seen you do that, Mike, and your statement about the agreements, be impeccable. I've seen you go to the nth degree to be able to verify something before you're willing to accept it or say it. I understand, and I'm a 30,000 foot view guy, and you're down there, not beyond the gravel. You're down in the sand, and I respect that about you, and I admire that about you. That's not me, but I'll tell you. This is the kind of thing that gripes me. Donald Trump is building a ballroom adjacent to the east wing of the White House. Now, the first thing about that is that Donald Trump is raising all the money to build that from private individuals. No tax dollars are being spent on building that ballroom. Now, maybe there's a security guard or something that's doing something, and maybe you could say that's inexpensive. But the actual building is not costing the United States of America, the taxpayers, a nickel. Yet people are complaining about it. How many times have you heard, he knocked down the East Wing? Well, that's not really true. What he did was there was a little portico on the side of the East Wing. If you have a mudroom in your house, you might think about it something like that. It was like an entranceway that people could wipe their feet before they went into the White House. And that's what they took off the end of the. Now they're building this ballroom, and what Donald Trump wants to do is have the largest, most opulent ballroom available. When we have state dinners, oftentimes we have to do it out on the lawn with tents and tables on the lawn. And it doesn't matter if it's cold or if it's windy or if it's rainy or if it's snowy or whatever, you have it outside. To have it inside presents a different view of America. Donald Trump because Donald Trump loves America. He wants foreign dignitaries to come to the White House and be impressed. When you go to France or you go to England or you go to many other countries, you go to some of the countries in the Middle East, France and England have these huge palaces that were built 200, 300 years ago. We don't have that. And they're all ornamental and intricate and beautiful and filled with gold and crystal and very impressive. In the Mideast, because they have recent money, they have these brand new monuments with gold and just very, very opulent. So Donald Trump wants to have that kind of place to impress people from other nations about America. And when you understand that it comes from his position of love of this country, and you understand that it's not costing the American taxpayer a nickel, how can anybody be against that? Does that make any sense to you? Does it make any sense at all for people to be upset about him doing this when there's no, you ever hear the term "no skin off my back"? They don't have it. The American people don't have any skin in this game. Donald Trump is doing this completely without cost to the American people. And he's doing it because he loves this country and he wants the United States of America to have the same kind of place to entertain dignitaries as those other countries do. So where we're at with this, Mike, is how can you complain? See, these are the things that drive me wild. Donald Trump is verbose, and he is he's hyperbolic when he talks about these things that he's doing. But they are good for the American people. They're good for the American public. They're good for the American government. And in this particular case, like many other things that he's done, there's no cost to the American people. Yet people will criticize it without any kind of factual or good reason to criticize. It makes no sense. It's the same thing with the tariffs we were talking about. People say the tariffs are bad. Well, partially that's true. As you noted, Mike, very small increase in prices, but it is a right now small cost to the American people. But the benefit is long term and great to the American people. Maybe not the people that are complaining, but certainly to many people in America. And so, you stack all these things up and you say, well, listen, I can not like the way Donald Trump talks. I can not like the way Donald Trump tweets. I can not like the way he talks about himself in third person. I cannot like the way he uses hyperbole when he talks. But what he's done, I like a lot.
Yeah, you like the end results. That's the thing. It'll be very interesting, I believe, when the next president takes over. I wonder how they will react to a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio or a Ron DeSantis. As I watched history unfold in my life, I forgot a lot of things. And thankfully, there's this little thing out there called YouTube. And I forget when it first came into being, but there is an awful lot of recorded information out there. And this personal problem that people have with Donald Trump, we think it's just Donald Trump. But it's often pointed out on YouTube in different places, they were calling Bush a Nazi, Gestapo, Hitler. I think it goes all the way back probably before Ronald Reagan. Now, obviously, it can't go back much before FDR or Eisenhower because we didn't know what a Nazi was then. But there have always been these disparaging terms and epithets, accusations pointed at various presidents, both left and right, but I would say more on the right, because we stand for a strict moral code, and Donald Trump did break that mold a little bit. I've often said he is acting like a Democrat. He speaks like a Democrat. In your face, doesn't care how stupid he sounds sometimes. And the Democrats just can't stand when somebody fires back at them with the same kind of rhetoric that they've been firing at us.
Yep.
So anyway, I don't know. We're over an hour already.
Yeah, we better wrap this up, Mike. I want to leave you with this meme that I saw on, I don't remember if it was YouTube or Facebook or whatever, but this person posted, there's a whole lot of people that are complaining about Donald Trump building a ballroom onto the White House. And I understand. But let's face it, Donald Trump is building a ballroom because he's the first president with balls since Reagan.
That's a good one.
All right. I guess we'll wrap it up. Mac and Mike.
Out.
Out.